In order to start in a more formal way, I would welcome you to this international conference, Arab Geopolitics 2024. You may wonder about the name, but we started like with this name 10 years ago. And as we are conservative people, we thought that we may continue to enhance this word because Arab geopolitics seems to me to be a correct way to refer to the region. This is the 10th time that we organize such an event dedicated to the region. The first time was in 2011, and this is telling a lot about our priority since the beginning of the NATO Defense College Foundation. This region is so important to us for many reasons, starting from history and culminating in humanity. We believe in that very much. In Rome, at the center of the Mediterranean, we feel a special attachment, and we think it is an ideal place to engage in a friendly discussion. We said several times in previous occasions that our aim is to accompany the main region to become an arc of opportunities instead of an arc of crisis. We are aware that this is a special moment, tragic in many ways, where violence is present and human suffering so widespread. But we are not here to discuss the war. It is done every day and is part of an ongoing discussion from many actors. We have no added value there, and we don't want to repeat things already in the media. We think instead that this is the moment to look at the future. We hope a non-distant future, because it is during the storm that the ship must continue to head towards a safe harbor. And this is our intent. Given the richness of the region, from the Atlantic to the Arabic Gulf, it's not possible to resume it in simplistic formulas. We want to look at the possible role of the Atlantic Alliance and also the European Union. Traditional security providers, they played a role in the past and can certainly adapt and create new formulas adapted to new realities, leaving behind fragmentation and the lack of regional cooperation that happened in the past several times. NATO had two initiatives, and some of you may remember that, in the past. The Mediterranean Dialogue started in 1994, open to 7 countries in the Mediterranean and the Levant. Jordan was part of it, is not exactly in the Mediterranean, but is part of that. And the Istanbul Cooperation Initiative, proposed to the 6 countries of the Gulf Cooperation Council. It has worked for years, developing good relations, improving ties, connecting people. I had myself a personal role, I'm very proud of that, in addressing the birth and the development of those partnerships. For those who are not familiar with that, they are made of political dialogue and practical cooperation, and has to be a two-way street based on the principle of joint ownership and prior consultation. You know that in recent years, the events in Eastern Europe have attracted the main attention of the Alliance, so this is a fact. But in any case, the Washington summit that took place in July, 3 months ago, to mark the 75th anniversary of NATO, has decided that the southern neighborhood cannot be ignored and set a roadmap towards the objective of renewing past partnerships by adapting past activities and creating new tools. Ladies and gentlemen, my friends, this process is starting now, and it is the main objective of this conference. It is not for me to give specific indications, but for instance, I think that the protection of maritime and trade routes, the safeguard of energy infrastructure, personal exchanges, they seem to be natural outcomes. We are happy to have here so many speakers and moderators having accepted our invitation and coming from a variety of countries. I thank them for having accepted this invitation, and I am happy to cooperate with many old friends. I know many of you, lucky enough, in the direction of peace and cooperation. We are perfectly aware These times are difficult, and it's not easy to look forward to a different kind of reality. But history shows that sooner or later, wars give way to peace. It is our duty to look at that horizon, convinced that we call cooperative security a priority and we have to work for that. I look forward to high-level scientific conversation, and I ask everybody to speak in a spirit of mutual respect, as it is always the case in the tradition of our conference. And I thank all those who made possible the event, as you can see from the program, and of course the staff of the foundation worked very hard to make this event possible. Thank you very much for your attention.
Good afternoon. My name is Florence Gaub. I'm the director of the research division in NATO Defense College. We're very happy to co-sponsor this event. And for those of you who don't know me, you should know that I'm somebody who tries to be optimistic at all times. So I thought in my opening remarks, I will touch on a few things that make me feel hopeful for the region, for the simple reason that you will spend the rest of today not being hopeful. So that is because the human mind is wired towards threat perception. So your job today is not to look at everything that's going to be okay. It is to look at things that are not okay. So I will offer you a few reasons for why I think it's not all as dark as it perhaps looks. So there are essentially three areas where I think there's a promising future on the way for the Arab world: economic transformation, social empowerment, and sustainable development. First, economic transformation. I started working on this region in 2003, more than 20 years ago. At the time, it was completely reliant on oil, natural resources, those that had it. But since then, many nations have started diversifying their economies, recognizing that the future is in not just renewable energy, but in general in innovation and technology and knowledge-based industries. We have many more startups than we used to have. We have investments in renewable energy, and we have a focus on education. All of this drives this transformation. So if you are depressed for one moment, remember where we came from and where we are now. Just one example is, of course, Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030. It's not just a blueprint for economic growth, but a comprehensive plan to transform the kingdom into a hub of innovation and cultural exchange. In the UAE, Dubai has established itself as a global tech and tourism center, setting an example of how modern industries can blend with traditional values. And of course, also in Egypt, we have an embracing of economic reform. I could go on, but I also want to emphasize that there's also surging entrepreneurship amongst Arab youth. Across the entire region, young entrepreneurs are creating tech startups, developing mobile apps, and advancing solutions for agriculture, healthcare, and fintech. It's a whole generation of innovators, and it's rewriting the region's economic story, proving that the Arab world is not just keeping up with global trends, but actually helping to shape them. I will also add that the region is experiencing a powerful wave of social empowerment. Again, if you have the longer lens, as I do, you remember that there is, of course, the so-called youth bulge, which gained some negative connotation in 2011. But actually, this youth is what now promotes also movements in art, in culture, in social justice. And I will say young Arabs, in my humble opinion, redefine traditional roles and challenge outdated stereotypes. They're motivated, educated, and connected to the world like never before. This also concerns women's empowerment, be it in Jordan, Lebanon, Tunisia, Morocco. We see women entrepreneurs, scientists, and leaders making strides across all sectors as we have never seen it before. So this is a shift in dynamics that is, I would say, completely new, and it benefits everybody. And of course, perhaps my favorite bit, cultural revival is also on the rise. When it comes to music, to film, to art and literature, Arab creators are making their mark globally, telling stories rooted in heritage, looking forward to the future. If you have missed any of that, Netflix will help you out. I think we are onto something very big and new. The same goes, of course, to sustainable development. We know that the region is making impressive strides. I think Morocco is now the only country, along with Gabon, to be carbon neutral by the standards of the climate tracker. There's no other country in the world, I think Gabon, but that's it. Of course, also Jordan is a leader in renewable energy. The UAE will host the COP28 climate conference, has pledged to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. Across the region, we see green initiatives in agriculture, water conservation, urban planning, everywhere. I will say that the embrace of sustainability is not limited to government policies. It's also very much driven by civil society. I see this in Egypt. I also see it in Lebanon. It's really across the region. Now, you didn't come here today to discuss any of that. And so let me briefly touch on wars and conflict. Of course, the future I just sketched out is threatened, jeopardized by the ongoing and perhaps future conflicts. And of course, the region has witnessed its fair, actually more than unfair, share of wars and struggles. However, I also think that we're seeing an emerging commitment to peace building and regional cooperation that promises a different future. We have more and more Arab nations investing in diplomacy, mediation, conflict resolutions. We have initiatives across it that have demonstrated that when leaders prioritize dialogue over division, there is a chance for peace. And I think that's a growing realization. And as I said, young people in particular, connected through social media and empowered through education, are increasingly advocates for peace and unity in a way that I have not seen before. I'm old enough to remember. So in many ways, I will say the future is still being written, rewritten, very much by the region itself. We, as NATO, hope to be partners of these regions. We are neighbors, whether or not we are partners. So I think that's also in the spirit that we go forward. But I would like to leave you with one note. Do not fall into the trap of thinking it's never been as bad as now. It has been very bad in the past. Every moment in history is unique. And you're not going to make the task easier for yourself by thinking it is uniquely bad. There's a lot that can be done. And as I said, I see sprouts for hope everywhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Florence, adding your charm to our conference. Thank you for coming. Now we should have Nicolò Russo Perez, who is the Director of International Affairs at the Compagnia of São Paulo, a big supporter of the foundation, and he's on remote, so I don't know where exactly he's there. Nicolò, you are in my show. The floor is yours.
Ambassador. I hope you can hear me well in the room. I think the volume is. I hope the volume is good. So thank you very much for the kind invitation and good evening to all the participants. Sorry for not being in person in Rome. The Compagnia San Paolo Foundation is today one of the largest private foundation in Europe and among the main independent funders in Italy of activities in the field of international relations studies, with particular emphasis on the three traditional dimensions of the Italian foreign policy, so European, transatlantic, and Mediterranean. Against this background, the Compagnia San Paolo has been supporting the NATO Defense College Foundation since already a few years, since actually its inception. This is a long-term strategy with which the Compagnia has chosen to combine the support to its territory of origin, we could say, which is the city of Turin, with an openness to international issues. And it has done so because increasingly we realize that the challenges that we face in our daily life are in fact local phases of much broader global issues. In this context, Russia's war against Ukraine has brought defense issues back at the center of the political agenda and also of the public opinion, with a consequent strong impact on Italy's perception of its role within the alliance. In the NATO context, already 2022 was marked by, as you know, the approval of the new strategic concept at the Madrid summit. The document is let's say, the result of the return of a large-scale war on the European continent, but also of a process of, I would say, a much broader process of renewal within the alliance, which looks to 2030 in a context of aggressive multipolarity. The concept prioritizes, of course, Russia among the various challenges facing the Euro-Atlantic area, and it also takes into account the growing assertiveness of China. Of great relevance for Italian interest and for today's conference as well is certainly the mention of the southern flank, identified by NATO as a source of instability and vulnerable to interferences from strategic opponents of the alliance. The strategic concept, and this is also a very important point, I think, highlight as well how climate change consequences are a source of further fragility in the Sahel, in North Africa, and in the Middle East. Even in the new strategic framework determined by the Russian invasion of Ukraine, let's say the wider Mediterranean remained at the center of the Italian agenda in NATO. Solidarity with the countries of the eastern flank is regularly accompanied by the insistence on the part of the Italian political representative on the importance of the southern flank, with the aim of keeping alive the attention on a region, the Arab region, that can by no means be neglected in the current transatlantic debate, which is focused on Russia and the eastern flank. Italy has so far achieved, I think a quite strong overall focus on the wider Mediterranean, with a perspective of synergies between NATO and the EU that must find, of course, the right balance between Europeanism on the one hand and Atlanticism on the other hand. The enlarged Mediterranean, which is central to Italy, will therefore not become secondary for NATO, even in the context of a return to roots of the Atlantic Alliance with regards to Moscow. Italy's intention to advance its own agenda within NATO and to maintain a high level of attention for the enlarged Mediterranean, of course, requires important investment, together with the willingness to renewing past partnership like the Mediterranean Dialogue and the Istanbul Cooperation Initiative, as it was mentioned by Ambassador Minutorizzo, and of course to creating new tools as well for enhanced cooperative security with the partners in the Arab region. The most important challenge, I think, for Italy is now to give substance to intentions, translating into funding and operational decision the country's strategic priorities defined and confirmed by the last governments. In this context, it is key to develop a shared strategic framework, as we are doing with this international conference, and to implement practical cooperation among partners in the Mediterranean region, with both a review of the common security challenges and also the inclusion of crisis management, crisis prevention, but also maritime and infrastructure protection, for example, and other key areas of shared interest for the region. I conclude my remarks by underlying that the topic addressed in today's conference is of extreme interest to any public or private actor, as we are, in fact, and for our country. It is an effective example of how the civil and the military sectors can together make a fundamental contribution to public goods as a safe, secure, and rule of law-based international environment certainly is. So thank you very much to the organizer. Thanks to the NATO Defense College Foundation, in particular to its president, good friend, Ambassador Alessandro Minutorizzo. Thanks to the international partners, the experts, and the institutional representative who have accepted the invitation to today's event. I wish you all an interesting and fruitful discussion and conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you to you, Niccolo. Thank you for your presentation and also for putting forward Italian views on that, which is, something which is, of course, very useful speaking from Rome. So thank you very much again, Niccolo. Very welcome. Now, this is the part, of introduction. Now, the first speaker will be Giovanni Romani. Giovanni Romani is the head in political affairs in Brussels, NATO headquarters, for the Middle East. So he's a person who is how can I say, the best person who can introduce the day of our discussion.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, and good afternoon, and a big thank you to the NATO Defense College Foundation for organizing this important conference and also for giving me this opportunity. It's a pleasure for me to address you about NATO's relation with its southern neighborhood. Beyond the Middle East, we're also talking about Africa, given the rapidly evolving regional situation and the ongoing numerous crises, because there's not only gas, of course, affecting the region, the timing of this discussion couldn't be better. Now more than ever, we can see that security is not regional, it is global. Middle East and Africa are very important to our shared security. Stability and challenges are completely interconnected. And those we face in the Euro-Atlantic area, those challenges are the same that actually our partners face in the Middle East and Africa. And they all directly affect our security and the security of our partner. At the same time, it's not only about challenges, because NATO's engagement provides ample opportunities for cooperation on issues of mutual interest. And many partners, let's not forget, that are active security providers in the region and contribute to promoting regional security, as well as to upholding the rules-based international order. Through our partnerships, we aim to foster greater security and stability in Middle East and Africa, contributing to peace and prosperity in the region. And for the purpose, it's important to understand what role European and transatlantic actors can play. This is crucial amidst the complexity that we're facing, but also in the long run. We need to be able to look beyond the present challenges and the present crisis and help create the conditions for the development of a more stable and safer security environment. That is why NATO has been renewing and enhancing its effort in the region. As you know, at the last summit in Washington, Allied leaders adopted the Southern Neighborhood Action Plan for a stronger, more strategic and result-oriented approach to the region. This was the result of a year-long reflection process, which started at the previous summit in Vilnius. The first phase was led by an independent group of experts appointed by the Secretary General, which produced a report which I'm sure most of you have read. Building on this report, allies agreed upon the action plan I was mentioning. And this aims at reinforcing our dialogue, strengthen our visibility, and enhance our existing instruments for cooperation. Also, Secretary General Stoltenberg appointed Mr. Colomina as NATO Special Representative for the Southern Neighborhood. And this month, the new Secretary General Mark Rutte has assumed his functions and has listed partnership among his top priorities. So these milestones send a very clear political signal of our commitment to our Southern Neighborhood partner and to also other relevant interlocutors. So Mr. Colomina will serve as NATO's first ever focal point for the region, and he is responsible for implementing the main pillars of the action plan. And I will now mention the main elements of this action plan. First, we will enhance political dialogue and engagement with the region. This is through regular high-level meetings and also an agenda on common security challenges, which is being developed together with our partners. It is clear that we must listen harder, better, and more actively to the partners, and in the current context, it's more important than ever. Reaching out to other relevant actors, particularly those interested in exploring a partnership with NATO, will also be important to expand NATO's network in the broader region. So first, political dialogue. Second point, practical cooperation. So we aim at increasing practical cooperation, and we will focus on areas in which NATO can add value, and particularly in areas where we do best: security, defense efforts, advice, education, and training. NATO is not a sweet knife that can be used for just anything. So there are some areas in which we are stronger, and certainly we can provide a value contribution. So we also need to make the best possible use of our facilities and tools, which we already have at our disposal. Let me mention the Hub for the South in Naples, the NATO ICI Regional Center in Kuwait, and tools such as the Defense Capacity Building Initiative, which in the South is it's a program Iraq, Mauritania, Tunisia, and Jordan already benefit from. The Special Representative is also aiming to make our approach more coherent and effective by achieving a better coordination of NATO efforts in the South. This is critical to ensure that we deliver on commitments and match our level of ambition. Third point, we want to improve our presence and visibility in the region. For instance, allies have decided to open a NATO liaison office in Jordan. This will be the first ever such office in Middle East and Africa. At the same time, we also want to strengthen NATO's outreach to regional audiences, and this includes systematically engaging with youth and civil society. Concretely, it means having many more conversations such as the one we're having today. On top of that, we aim to engage more with regional media. Let me underline that we need a more robust public communication and outreach effort. We need to better explain NATO. And we need to demystify misunderstandings about NATO's role and involvement in the region and to counter disinformation spread by our adversaries. Finally, fourth point, through the action plan 4 pillar, we're focused on deepening our synergies with other regional and international organizations working in Middle East and Africa, such as the United Nations, the European Union, the Gulf Cooperation Council, the African Union, and the League of Arab States. Within these strands, boosting NATO-EU cooperation, for example, can be a very solid avenue for enhancing our respective and joint contribution to regional security and stability. Of course, in all of these points, our NATO partnerships assume a central role. We cannot talk about our renewed effort towards the region without teaming up with them. We maintain long-standing relations with various partner countries across the southern neighborhood, most of which engage with NATO both bilaterally and multilaterally. As you know, we have 2 main partnership frameworks. The ICI, Istanbul Cooperation Initiative. Ambassador, you were a key in actually launching this initiative 20 years ago, and the Mediterranean Dialogue. So, as I said, a partnership with the Gulf state is a good example of successful cooperation, and for 2 decades, the ICI partnership framework has provided a trust-building platform through which NATO allies and our 4 ICI partners, Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, and the UAE, have met regularly to discuss the security issues of common concern. Our dialogue with them has been fruitful at all levels, from engaging with the Northern Atlantic Council. We have regular meetings of the so-called Policy Advisory Group. The next is scheduled in Qatar in December. And this allows for regular joint discussions about shared security challenges. Even beyond our ICI partner, the framework has also provided valuable opportunities to deepen our engagement with Oman, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and the Gulf Cooperation Council. And broadening cooperation with the Gulf region has been a growing priority of the alliance in recent years. And let me mention also the visit of Secretary General Stoltenberg to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia last December, which was the first ever in the 75 years of the alliance. More recently, a few weeks ago, in the margins of the UN General Assembly, the Crown Prince of Kuwait, at the presence of the Secretary General Stoltenberg, has hosted an event to celebrate the 20th anniversary of the ICI. But 2024 also marks the 30th anniversary of the cooperation with the Mediterranean Dialogue countries, a framework which contributes to security and stability in the wider Mediterranean region and promotes good relations and understanding among the participant countries and NATO allies. The Med dialogue is certainly an important framework with two pillars of political dialogue and practical cooperation, which addresses challenges in North Africa and Sahel. Certainly, with the current crisis, this is a framework that has suffered, and so we will have to do like our best effort to revitalize the Med dialogue, or maybe start looking into more flexible frameworks. In addition to these two frameworks, NATO has also long-standing and fruitful relationship with Iraq, which engages in bilateral political dialogue and practical cooperation with NATO. One of the main pillars is certainly the NATO mission in Iraq, a non-combat advisor and capacity building mission, which has helped Iraq in stabilizing and fighting terrorism and preventing the return of ISIS-Daesh. And in August 2024, NATO and Iraq launched a high-level political dialogue, which will now continue in the future to further build on existing cooperation, but look also into the long-term partnership between NATO and Iraq. So this is where we currently stand, but as I mentioned, we want to bring this forward and increase cooperation and dialogue with the partners. That's the most important part. And our approach will always be underpinned by the principle of mutual benefit, mutual respect, and mutual interest. Let me end by thank you for this opportunity to address you today at a time where dialogue with and about NATO's southern neighborhood is more crucial than ever. Events such as this one that bring together diverse voices from the region, from allied countries, from partners, from international organizations, civil society and academia, are essential to build a shared understanding of the challenges, but above all, the opportunities lying ahead. And let me also say that from a NATO perspective, dialogue, engagement, mutual communication will remain key aspects of our approach toward the South in these very difficult times for the region, in which, yes, Middle East, but also crises such as Sahel, Sudan, Libya, which is still unstable, and others, just to mention a few, are affecting the region. So we will need for all positive actors to contribute to shaping a more promising future. So thank you, and thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Giovanni, for your presentation. Thank you very much. Now we have the first panel. We have very distinguished panelists, and I think you could go there. The subject is a minor one, the strategic narrative of the southern region. So here you are. You're welcome, caro Luigi.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, Your Excellencies. For those who don't know, my name is Matthew Robinson, the director of the Euro-Gulf Information Center based here in Rome. I'd, of course, like to first thank Ambassador Minuto Rizzo for his kind invitation today, and for Director Alessandro Politi and all of the NATO Defense College Foundation staff and sponsors for their sterling organization and today's conference. I think you've managed to bring together an outstanding array of opinion formers, experts, and leaders in politics, defense, and security. I'd like to echo the ambassador's remarks in his opening statement about a pursuit of common humanity. As someone who grew up in Northern Ireland during our own conflict in our little part of the world and our pursuit for a peace process, I know the importance of that all too well. So thank you, Ambassador, for your excellent remarks at the beginning. It was just 4 years ago in November 2020 as we were cautiously navigating the coronavirus pandemic that I last had the privilege of speaking at your Arab Geopolitics conference. The importance of this gathering is more vital and relevant now more than ever, and I have no doubt by the end of the session and today's conference, we will grow a little wiser, hopefully, a little more astute to the challenges we collectively face in the southern region and the various solutions to this. But against that backdrop of optimism, we do live in very uncertain times. You've heard that from our previous speakers already, and you'll be hearing throughout today of the perils of political and security life in the East Mediterranean, the southern region, and the wider Middle East. The panel of this session, the strategic narrative of the southern region that I have the privilege of moderating, contains three stellar individuals, experts in their field. To my left, Christian Koch, the director of the Research Division, Gulf Research Center in Brussels. To my immediate right, Ahmed Massadeh, former Director General of the Union of the Mediterranean in Amman, Jordan, and Luigi Narboni, to my far right, Director of the Mediterranean Platform, right here at the School of Government at Lewis University in Rome. Thank you to our panel. We hope they will walk us through some of the main strategic challenges that are unfolding in the southern region. There are, of course, many institutional approaches to deal with the menu of crises that we face today, just like there are, to be optimistic, a myriad of other innovative solutions. Despite all this, I think there is cause for guarded optimism, because the region is no longer far out there in a distant place, but NATO, the EU, and the United States have all collectively shortened this distance and included the southern region at the heart of our political and economic and security conversation. I think this is all too important. One only needs to look at the seriousness that our core institutions have treated the southern region. You've heard some of this from Giovanni just before. During the 75th Annual Summit in July, NATO boldly announced plans to open the first Middle East liaison office in Jordan. The historic EU-GCC summit that took place in Brussels earlier this month. The May 2022 adoption by the EU Council, the joint communication of the EU on strategic partnership with the Gulf. The EU's appointment of former Italian Foreign Minister Luigi Di Maio as the first ever EU Special Representative for the Gulf region. And of course, as mentioned, the appointment in July of this year of NATO's Deputy Assistant Secretary General for Political Security Affairs, Javier Colomina, as the Special Representative to the Southern Neighborhood. Now, before I turn over to our panel, just a little bit of housekeeping. Each of our speakers will have approximately 7 minutes to make their remarks. I will try my best to keep the panel to that. And then from then, we'll have a open and robust Q&A, an opportunity to further elaborate on our panel's remarks. So you've heard far too much from me. Now, starting, I think, with Christian. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Matthew. And of course, thank you very much to the NATO Defense College Foundation, Ambassador Rizzo, also Luisa University for the invitation. I think when you receive an invitation to come to Rome, you just don't turn it down, but it's always great to be back here. I think the title here, Augmenting NATO's Southern Partnerships, is apt, but I'm not so sure if just augmenting is enough. Also in the program, it sort of talks about a little bit of a change in the discourse or changing the narrative. I'm not so sure it's just about the narrative and the discourse. I think it's really about the structural approach that we're looking at, and maybe that's something to focus on. So in that context, and I'll focus it more on the NATO Gulf sort of framework, really want to make 3 points. I mean, the first is, and here I will start more with the negative. I mean, if we're looking at the region right now, we're looking at the security environment. It's not only continues to be volatile and marked by uncertainty, and I said this already when I was here 2 years ago, but I think what we've seen since then is even more additional layers being added to that. And it's really a kind of a catastrophic situation. I mean, since the horrific events, of course, of October 7th, we've seen more layers being added. And then if you're talking about a view from the Gulf states, the GCC states, I think there are really deep concerns about them being pulled in, being dragged in unintentionally into wider conflict situation. Whether that means, the energy facilities in the region, we already have a precedent on that, the attack in September 2019 on Saudi Arabia oil facilities. The fact that the Gulf states host many US bases, which could be subject to further retaliation. The heightened extremism that is the result of everything that we've seen over the past years. And you really have to be concerned about, is the current wave of violence, what is this producing ultimately in terms also of future generations? And I mean, and then if we're talking about possible altercations, what this means between Israel and Iran, I think there's concern in the region that we might see somehow like a repeat of what happened after 2003 in Iraq. This is really poor post-war planning when we see the state really just collapsing in itself and the repercussions this had for the wider region. It took 2 decades for Iraq really to begin to recover from this. I mean, when we get down to the bottom, also in terms of NATO's approach, we've seen no effective policies being developed how to deal with violent non-state actors. We don't see any effective policies on ballistic missile proliferation, no effective policies on the Iranian nuclear program, even on maritime security, which has come, right into the headlines, questionable. There are concerns about the bigger events, climate change, energy transition, the world order in transition, future of artificial intelligence. And then you really have to think about, not just today, where is this all going? Reconstruction, even if we're talking sort of a day after, the reconstruction of infrastructure is probably easy, but how to reform the institutions so that they're really delivering on good governance, which is what much of the region requires, is more difficult. And I mean, I think also Florence was sort of mentioning it, sort of this change in mindset of future generations. I mean, my chairman, my boss, Dr. Abdelaziz Sagar, recently talked about, changing people. It's really about much broader, and these are much more difficult processes. So I think, at the moment, really, when the Gulf region looks also at the role of NATO, I think they don't see this comprehensive multilateral framework. They don't see any movement towards some kind of security system, which I think the region really desperately needs. So that's sort of point one, where we are. The second is, though, we do see, at least within the Gulf region, in the GCC, I think there's a recognition that a new approach is required, that we need to break with the patterns of the past in order to reverse this sort of constant spiral of violence and pulling us down. And here, the Gulf states have really taken the lead. Overall, on a whole de-escalation strategy, fixing the problems within the GCC, the rift over Qatar, that's coming back together on that front, taking a lead at the moment in offering diplomatic solutions to the issues in Gaza and the Palestinian issue, really taking the forefront and putting diplomatic coalitions together, fixing relations in the region, whether in Yemen, looking for the political solution, going away from the military approach, even in far away, not immediate theaters of conflict, Ukraine, Russia, the Gulf has played a role in terms of mediating prisoner exchanges. We see a GCC vision for Gulf security that was tabled earlier this year. It gives you a combined sort of vision of where these countries want to see the future going. And I think that's important. We see them reaching out to different partners. Definitely, I mean, there are driving factors for that, which is really the feeling that so far The international community has done little more than simply manage problems, but nothing really to contribute to solution of problems. There are doubts, of course, about US reliability, where this will going. Europe is not really seen as a serious security actor when it comes to the problem. And of course, there's concerns about own stability. There's a complete understanding that if this region continues to be defined by the violence that we see now, that all of the vision programs, all of the economic developments and modernization programs are somewhat at risk. So again, there's a conviction now in the region that it's time to act. It's time to move and it's time to move forward. And I think here an important message to NATO is simply that the GCC states will move. They're not going to sit around and wait now until others put their house in order and decide to have different approaches. They're ready to have, of course, NATO is an important organization. They want that relationship with NATO. They take it very, very serious. But again, if NATO is not there, they will move elsewhere because they cannot wait. They see the urgency of the situation. This is not to say that there's going to be, in case nothing happens, there'll be a break. I think there's fully still understanding that still the security is very much tied, of course, to the United States, to other Western actors. But a diversification is going on. And I think that needs to be acknowledged. And then just quickly, my third point, and here I will try to follow Florence's sort of looking a little bit more positively, maybe about some of the developments, and go back to this idea of a more structured approach I mentioned at the beginning. I think NATO's review process definitely is very positive. The recommendations of the expert group, and if you haven't looked at it, please do, because I think it's a very good document with lots of really tangible suggestions being put forward. Now, Mr. Romani has already outlined many of these things, where NATO wants to take it. But I think you need to take, in the future, the relationship NATO-GCC, I think, needs to be at the core of this a little bit. Because I think here NATO does have partners that are ready, that have increased capacity, that have the resources to play a role, and there's a convergence of interests between the two. So if I can just say, sort of focus on two specific issues, one's already sort of been mentioned, but I think we need to see more of it. NATO should take a look a little bit at the EU-GCC relationship and how it's developed over the last 2 years, where we really see a lot of good progress. And that starts with the appointment of an EU special representative, which is the good news that we now have that from the NATO side as well. But it's already gone into many different new institutional contexts. A structured security dialogue that is happening, a high-level forum that was held at the level of foreign ministers in April. Now, more recently, the first ever GCC-EU summit meeting, which really produced a joint statement that is very, very comprehensive. So what we see now in that, on the EU-GCC side, is a very multi-layered approach. There are bilateral programs, there are multilateral programs. It's very flexible, but it has a lot of potential now. And I think NATO can use that also to structure its approach going forward. And then you sort of pick two specific areas where I think action could be warranted. Maritime security is really at the forefront. We all need the freedom of navigation, the security of sea lanes, especially for an energy important region such as the Gulf. And I think from a Gulf perspective, it's almost kind of hard to understand how NATO is not playing a role as an organization when it is supposed to be a security organization. You have an American initiative, you have a European-led mission in the Red Sea. We don't see NATO in that sense. And then the second sort of area where I would also like to see more emphasis is the whole issue of artificial intelligence, because I think all of us are sort of feeling slowly being overwhelmed by it. And there's a lot of need for capacity building in the region. I think NATO has a lot of qualifications on that. And having the NATO Regional Center in Kuwait could be one area where you can do a lot more emphasis on this region, because there'll be a lot of interest. And I think that can foster then the partnership going forward. I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much, Christian. Thank you for those remarks. And I just one takeaway, I think probably one of the most powerful things you said, that we cannot let what's the tragedy of what's going on in certain parts of the region. We cannot be defined by violence. There are too many, I think, causes for optimism, and thank you for laying out that in your remarks. Now we turn over to Ahmed Masada to my right for his remarks. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. First of all, by way of correction, I am the former Secretary General of the Union for the Mediterranean.
Sorry, General.
I'm not, so that because it sounded that I'm still in office or something, and I am a former ambassador of Jordan to the EU and to NATO. However, today I'm sitting here in my personal capacity without any official standing. So I'm speaking to you as a Jordanian national or citizen. I'll pick on 2 points that I'll, in my opening remarks in the short period that I have. First is the meanings that we get from the opening of the NATO liaison office in Jordan. From the NATO perspective, I do believe that this shows a new commitment and engagement by NATO with its southern partners, forging the already going and continuous relations and cooperation frameworks between the alliance and the region. And so it is a sign in the right direction that NATO should focus more on that part of the world or that region. As to Jordan, this comes as no surprise. Jordan, for the last 3 decades, had a very deep-rooted relationship with NATO. Jordan has been very active in the Mediterranean dialogue over the past 30 years. I do remember during my tenure, we signed a strategic cooperation agreement at the time. We also managed to create trust funds to clear mines in Jordan at the time. So the country has always engaged in a very good relationship with NATO. But mostly I do believe that also this is a testimony about the Jordanian role. Jordan is a beacon of stability in terms of regional and global security. It has been a long-time champion in fighting transnational threats, including extremism and terrorism. So it comes as no surprise that this happens. I do believe that the opening of the office will deepen the political dialogue between Jordan and probably other Arab countries and the alliance. And it will open the door for more cooperation programs, whether it was in terms of seminars or lectures, probably issues that we need to focus on include, obviously, terrorism and security is at the core of NATO speciality, but we have to look at issues like climate change and civil emergency planning, public diplomacy, AI. I think that these topics also should be used throughout, the opening of the office or the liaison office in Jordan. So it's promising, and I have high hopes for that, and this is a step in the right direction. Now, the other topic that I'm going to tackle is that which I was asked to tackle as part of the session is that, is the South should not be perceived as a heterogeneous entity for which it is difficult to find solutions and resources. How to change this narrative? And then how do we reconcile discourse with realities? The question that I would like to ask to start with, in the eyes of NATO, how do you define the South? And then how do you consider it, whether it is homogeneous or heterogeneous? If you look at it in the context of Arab countries only, it is homogeneous. It is not heterogeneous. If you look at it, including Israel, I tell you it is heterogeneous. And I'll tell you why in a moment. If you go 50 years ago, we talk about actions that took place over the past 50 years. Since the 1970 wars that took place between the Arabs and Israel, the Arab countries opted and refrained from engaging in a hostile, military, war-oriented actions against Israel. And they have maintained the UN Charter obligations, United Nations Charter obligations, United Nations resolutions. They have also embarked on, of course, they have always upheld international law, and they have embarked on trying to find a solution with the Israeli part on amicable basis, and this is why we had the peace process launched some 30 years ago, culminating eventually that Egypt and my country, Jordan, signed a peace accord with Israel. And of course, with the hope that we will have an end to the peace process in general by having a Palestinian state. On the other side, what has Israel done over the past 50 years? It has negated international law. It has violated international law. It has violated its obligations under the United Nations General Assembly resolutions and resolutions in general on the conflict in the region. It has derailed the peace process, and eventually, over the past year, as we have witnessed, it has committed genocide crimes against the Palestinians in Gaza. It has also committed crimes or war crimes against Lebanon, as we've seen recently. So the question comes back to is the region, is it a heterogeneous or homogeneous entity? And if we look at the two values, I cannot see it other than being heterogeneous. The question becomes then, and if I also may add to all of this, is that if there are also intentions by the Israelis to put Jordan in a complicated situation in the future, this will not be just detrimental to Jordan, but also it will be detrimental to Israel itself and also to your interest at NATO and at the EU. And I promise you that it will mushroom more extremism and radicalism in the region. So the question is, how do we reconcile discourse with reality, the reality that I have just, demonstrated to you? I think it's very simple. It's by bringing and making Israel accountable again and under scrutiny. Israel cannot be above the law. It cannot be above UN Charter. It has to be back on track, and it has to uphold its international obligations. Until that happens, and when that happens, then all the objectives of the initiatives of NATO, including the opening of the office in Amman and other cooperation activities, will not, I'm afraid, will not fulfill its full goals and ambitions as NATO perceives. I'll end it here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those remarks, and I think that's so vital about underscoring the importance of international legal norms that are too often overlooked sometimes in the wave of populism that's becoming ever so common in some of our politics. So thank you so much for your remarks. And last but certainly not least, for our opening remarks in this round, Luigi Narbona, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thanks to my close friend and Ambassador Minuto Rizzo and the NATO Foundation for inviting me. So it's a great pleasure to start the discussion, and of course my brief presentation is not going to be very dissimilar to what we already heard. If we look at the security environment in the broader Euro-Mediterranean region, we notice the pervasive instability, recurrent shocks, and increasing strategic competition. Obviously, this has two sides. The MENA region, which we witness, if we look back at the past 14 years since the Arab uprising, has witnessed an increasing cycle of crisis and violent conflicts, leading to instability, state fragility, state failure, areas of limited statehood, with a very big human cost, multiple acute humanitarian crises, mass displacement of people, huge socioeconomic problems that many countries have to face, and of course, reverberation also on migration and radicalization, which affect necessarily also the northern part of the side of the Mediterranean. The pre-existing regional order somehow has collapsed, has failed, and has given rise over the past 13 years to increasing confrontation and polarizations among regional actors, which has been also, of course, augmented by dynamics of great power competitions, proxy wars, destabilizing rise of non-state actors supported by Iran. With all of that resulted in an inability by international and regional actors to resolve conflicts. And unresolved conflict have a tendency to recur. Violence flares up again, instability spreads into traditional and non-traditional security threats, including what we witness today, challenges at the maritime traffic, effect on critical infrastructure, and so forth and so on. All that, of course, has been noticed, has got even worse over the past year after the horrendous Hamas attack of the 7th of October. The escalatory dynamics that have been ignited by the Israel-Hamas war in Gaza and this recent escalation in Lebanon, all that, of course, with an enormous human cost, intensify confrontation between several parties and as a great danger of widespread regional war. So the solutions, of course, for the immediate clearly pass through a ceasefire in Gaza and in Lebanon, but also we need to notice that the last year events are somehow a shocking reminder of the disruptive power of unresolved conflicts. You cannot think about normalizing relations across the region without solving the problem, the Palestinian questions. That was perhaps the flow of the Abraham Accord. So for NATO and the EU, of course, things have, as you know, got very difficult since the Russian aggression in 2022. There was a wake-up call for the alliance. We need to refocus on the Eastern Front, rebuild deterrence and defense capabilities in response to the Russian threat. But also, I think it is also a wake-up call, the fact that you cannot simply disconnect what happens in the Eastern Front and in the Eastern flank and what happens in the Southern flank. Obviously, they are interconnected, not if only by the fact that Russia is present in the region. And of course, we have seen it with the increasingly close military ties between Russia and Iran, but that is not the only element. I think there are many more that need to bring back the attention of NATO and the European Union to the southern flank that has been clearly neglected over the past 13, 14 years. So one conclusion that we can draw is that Europe and the MENA region are clearly strategically interdependent. But this interdependence is different from what used to be in the past because the international system has changed and there is a new multipolar dynamics that shapes the relationship. And the countries in the region, of course, opt for multi-alignment. They do not want to take side necessarily. They try to push forward their own interests. So that's a new strategic reality that is in which the NATO needs to recognize, and the EU is, I think, recognizing as well. And I think the EU is already moved. The EU-GCC strategic partnership is a great sign of recognition of the importance of the relationship between the two regions, and that clearly it's a very ambitious. It's a multi-sector, multi-layer, as has been mentioned, goes from investment to energy digital transition, issues related to climate change, connectivity, economic diversification, support from the part of European companies. All that is clearly positive and can unlock the great potential that two regions have. So it's not all negative. There are positive things on the side. But of course, it's also important that, and the EU has also recognized it, and I think NATO too, that the security and geopolitical dimension needs to be brought into the fore. And there is, as been said, needs to be more careful listening from the part of NATO of what are the needs of our southern neighbors. And it's important to also highlight that the region, since 2020, the GCC and many countries in the Gulf have been moving forward into a diplomatic opening that has led to rapprochements across the region. Though all that is positive, the role of diplomacy, including the deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And I notice with certain interest that the fact that during this year of war, channels of communication across the region have remained open. And I think perhaps they've not succeeded to foster de-escalation, but certainly they have been a positive element in limiting the extent of escalation that could have been much worse if this was not there. So all that is important for the day after, for the role that NATO, the EU, and GCC can play for the broader region. We need to think about solutions that bring stability and security to all countries in the region, of course, including the resolution of the Palestinian question with a state for the Palestinians. And all that can be helped in a positive scenario through also the relaunching of the partnership that NATO can foster through the Mediterranean dialogue and the Istanbul Cooperation Initiative, increasing political dialogue, bolstering the presence of both the envoy and the places in the region that are present there to facilitate cooperation, exploring possible areas of cooperative security that are of mutual interest. And of course, there are low-hanging fruits there. Of course, maritime security is in the interest of everybody, and I think more can be done to explore joint solutions to addressing this issue. But even I would dare saying there could be more ambition to that, looking at facilitating dialogue and regional initiatives, also to enact and promote confidence-building measures that can, in the end, lead the way towards more multilateralism, and a stronger regional architecture for the region, which is clearly in the benefit of stability and of the partnership between the two. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Luigi. I think there's so many good takeaways from there. I think mass displacement and the migration strains here in Europe have been something that have dominated the political agenda here. It's something, especially in the EU institutions, that is consistently in the in-tray. And I think the interconnection of the Eastern Front and the Southern region as it relates to Russia is also key. So thank you so much for your remarks. We now have about 25 minutes for some questions and answers. I'll use my privilege, if you don't mind, as moderator to kick things off and get the ball rolling with the first question to the wider panel. AI has been touched on by some of the speakers. So my question, this goes to the whole panel. In parallel to what seems to be intractable conflicts that are forcing a rethink to the European approach to the southern region, I think there's also calls for optimism as it relates to our technological revolution. I think the promise is endless, and if we look to the momentum for things like smart cities at the heart of climate goals, especially in the Gulf region, artificial intelligence, you just got to look to the landmark AI Safety Summit hosted in Bletchley Park last year by the former UK government, the AI Act, which the European Parliament took a lead on. I think you correctly said, Christian, it can be somewhat daunting, and AI hangs over everything, and our legislators and our institutions are trying to navigate the regulatory framework as much as they can. So, with that being said, in your best expert opinion, how do you think the power of technology, AI, and innovation can be harnessed in the pursuit of our common shared interests and security? Would you admit that?
I'm not an expert on AI, to be honest with you, but I mean, I'll try. Eventually, I think the usage of technology has proved to be very important in bringing the common understanding of people and nations closer. And obviously, it has facilitated the lives of people. So basically, the more that we get into technology, the more that we are refurbishing our economies, especially at the southern flank of the Mediterranean. This is very important because I think, as we just heard rightfully, economy is very important. We have at least 300 million youngsters in the Arab world, and I do believe that these need job opportunities, innovative opportunities, and what better than doing it by using the technological facilities that is being now explored, and obviously using technology will facilitate also the other objectives that we were talking about in terms of maritime security or in terms of drugs and narcotics trafficking, and in addition to climate change. I think that and as long as we use technology in order to address threats, that is one part of it and very important, but also we should utilize the usage of technology in order to open opportunities for the youth and for our people actually everywhere, and that brings more of social stability in our region.
Thank you so much, and I think that's such a key point as it relates to the youth and the next generation. If you look to, especially you look to the Middle East, it's such a young region, and the promise of the next generation, some of the best and the brightest, you're seeing coming out of that part of the world. I think AI could be key to try and harness all of the capabilities of the next generation, our young people. So thank you. I think that's very insightful. Christian, do you want to weigh in on this?
Sure. I mean, I think bottom line is it's really like with many other things, it's finding the right balance in the end of the day. I mean, the technology does really give you lots of opportunities, but we also, of course, know the dangers of it being misused, and I think that's the great challenge we face at the moment. I think that in terms of the NATO Middle East also relationship, yes, technology has to be at the heart. In all the countries in the Middle East, they need to continue to develop themselves. The economic visions programs have technology at its center as well as the motor to further the energy transition, to get out from support more economic diversification. There's an absolute intent for in the Gulf to be innovation hubs. Innovation is a key theme in the region. But it's also not just about any more technology transfer. You want the technology to be start to be settled in the region, so that you can develop it from there. Ultimately, it's capacity building, but it's technology transfer, but then also ultimately technology generation also from the region. So, and as you mentioned, with the demographics in the region with such a large population of youth, the potential is absolutely there. So that needs to be at the heart of this kind of relationship. But I mean, we also need to be very careful, because we've seen how much of this technology is being misused, how already it's being used by violent non-state actors in the region, and the damage it can then do. So we need to have the effort on the technology side, the development, the innovation. But as you mentioned, regulation is absolutely important. And I think you see Gulf states being ready to play their part in developing that kind of regulatory framework, which is important then for the further development.
Thank you. And I think as opinion formers, and certainly you look to our institutions, it is a fine balance whether, yes, we need to act, but are we seeing perhaps a rush to, do we know what we're even regulating right now? And I think that you're already seeing a divide between the North American approach and the European approach. The North Americans, I think, are being far more cautious in the manner in which they are looking to find a footing for a regulatory framework for AI, whereas the EU has jumped right in. And I think that the AI Act was, we're starting to see the workings of it now, but was certainly a bold initiative on the part of the European institutions, the Commission and the Parliament. Would you like to?
I subscribe to what has been said. I mean, the technology and the AI have a great potential to become an engine for growth in the region and in Europe. I think there is a potential for the two regions to join forces on the fact that Europe as well has to catch up. The divide with the US and China is growing, and there is a need to invest more on artificial intelligence, and that obviously creates the potential for partnerships with Gulf countries. And the second aspect that I certainly subscribe entirely is the fact that technology can provide for the youth in the MENA region a great opportunity. I think countries need to jump on that opportunity and review completely their education system, create ecosystems for technology firms, and jumpstart this phase and get on board so that they can achieve a better place in the global arena, I think, economically. It's obviously to the advantage of Europe. Regulation alone won't do the job. I think we also need more investment, and we need to be at the forefront of technological innovation.
Maybe if I could just add one small point to that. I mean, just to expand that and also bring in the security dimension again. And we can have all the technological developments we want, but if we don't put enough emphasis on protection of critical infrastructure, we can also see a lot of it being destroyed. I mean, we see this instance now when the Red Sea, we've seen attacks against undersea cabling. And then the cabling system immediately having an impact and cutting off data flows and having tremendous financial costs. I mean, I heard some of the figures being something that there's 10 million financial transactions being immediately put on hold, causing millions of dollars of loss because we have an attack against the underwater cabling. Here, the Red Sea is critical. We have a lot of this, the cables being placed there. So again, a security dimension, the protection of that kind of infrastructure, this is again where I think NATO again plays a good role.
Thank you. And I think just on Luigi, as it relates to potential partnerships with the Gulf, I think we just saw the Draghi report that put a lot of emphasis on the need to ramp up European competitiveness. And I think this is one area it can overlap from a security standpoint, but certainly from an economic security standpoint in Europe, certainly with the Gulf region, partnering to try and harness the best of best practice as it relates to smart cities or AI. Should be a no-brainer, I think, for many in Europe and decision makers in the European Union. So, thank you. And with that, we have about 15 minutes left. I'm very keen to bring in our full house, our audience here. I'd ask you if you just briefly introduce yourself, but before you ask your question, and if it's directed to an individual on the panel, you can let us know that. The gentleman right on the front, please.
Thank you. Yeah, my name is Abdulaziz Al-Uwaishik. I'm the GCC Assistant Secretary General. I have a couple of questions, if you allow me. One for Christian. You mentioned the newly established GCC-EU security dialogue. And I was wondering if you think until we have a formal GCC-NATO similar dialogue, whether we could have something like triangulation where we have NATO, EU, GCC. And obviously it will have to be on some of the subjects that you mentioned, and there are also the subjects of the security dialogue between the GCC and the EU. It has to, for the time being, it has to be obviously informal, maybe similar to the high-level forum that we had in April in Luxembourg, but maybe at expert level or something. You think that would work? And the other question is for both Ahmed and Luigi. Both of you said that the Middle East conflict is probably the most pressing security challenge that we have. And my question is, where do you see NATO? Where do you think NATO can help? I was planning to talk about this somehow in my remarks later on, but I wanted to get your ideas. Maybe I can steal them. Is it in the peace process, or is it in the final outcome where you will need international guarantees, peacekeepers, that sort of thing? Where do you see NATO playing a role in this, in ending this conflict, or contributing to the solution? Thank you.
It might be an idea, just for the sake of time, just to take questions in just pairs and just so we can maximize the opportunity. Please, Ambassador.
Thank you, sir. Osama Al-Absi, I'm the ambassador of Bahrain to Italy. Initially, the thing that drew my attention is that we're drawing parallels between NATO and the EU, while they are totally different entities with different mandates. Yes, I do call, like many others, for NATO to have a more of an active presence in the Middle Eastern issues. But to the best of my knowledge, since its inception, NATO targets only towards one direction, which is east of Europe. That is the mandate that it has. And in order to go further beyond that, we need to understand the mandate, understand where it's going, because these parallels are truly unfair to the nature of the organization. Thank you.
Thank you. Would you like to start with that?
Well, I'll start from where the ambassador ended. It's about the mandate, and obviously, whenever you address the issue of the conflict in the Middle East to NATO, you'll get the answer that we are a security-led and oriented organization, and that the focus is only on security. We're not meddling with political affairs, let alone that there are other international fora and channels for the peace process and the ending the conflict in the Middle East. So basically, that is the answer that you will get from NATO. And then, as rightfully, Ambassador, you said it, of course, the focus has always been to East Europe. The southern flank or the southern rim of the Mediterranean was there, close by, but not at the forefront of NATO's interest. However, when we speak to NATO, we, before any solution, if ever we have a solution, we speak to the member states of NATO, because obviously they sit within NATO, putting this chapeau on their heads, but obviously they sit in other international arenas, in the EU and the United Nations. So basically, you want to engage the member states of NATO at this moment with their influence and power in order to facilitate a peaceful solution for the Middle East Arab-Israeli conflict or Palestinian-Israeli conflict. And I think that we're doing it, throughout lots of channels, but it doesn't harm also to remind the NATO member states, as member states within this organization, that is, always aim to have the regional and the global security intact, that if you don't have political solutions for political issues, then the security issue will come to you, which is happening accordingly. And then after, rightfully your question, after, assuming also that next morning, we wake up, guess what? We have peace accords, we have a Palestinian state, we have, people are happy again, no killing, and now we look, joyfully and positively, as our speaker also earlier said, to the future of the region. Of course, NATO will have a role. They have to have a role. Probably, I don't know whether there will be some boots on ground at a certain point in order to create some sort of security or buffer zones between the parties. Whether NATO will facilitate also through producing and giving its expertise, technological expertise in the areas that we tackled also earlier. To facilitate also cooperation between the parties or the states in the region. But I do believe that to talk about a concrete role for NATO in the conflict at this point, I don't see this happening. I do believe probably it comes at a different stage when we reach that stage, if we ever reach it.
Thank you. Christian?
Well, I think on this question of the structured security dialogue, I think, Mr. Romani already spoke a little bit about the fact. I think there needs to be a little bit more NATO-EU coordination now coming up in terms of, what are the relevant areas in which organization can take on these more specifically, and where is really the value added. There is a little bit of this danger of, overlapping as well as sort of duplicate efforts. And I think that really does need to be avoided. But to me, that's more of a conversation to be had between NATO and the EU at one stage. Now, the triangulation idea in the meantime will probably not be a bad idea. And you can do it a little bit informally, that as this also develops on the NATO front in terms of specific security discussions to be had, that you begin sort of already seeing where are certain boundaries and where there are overlaps to be avoided at one stage. So that could be sort of a good transition over to see then where is NATO really coming in on these issues, and how can you then take that, making sure that you don't overlap and duplicate efforts on these things.
I agree. In terms of what role NATO could play in the current conflict, it's certainly not clearly in the mediation phase, which is extremely complicated, by the way, but it's in the day after. Whatever happen when, if and when there are conditions for, and providing security guarantees, providing boots on the ground, peacekeeping force, providing training for local security forces. All that is a role that NATO can take up and can do it very well. In terms of cooperation, coordination between the EU and NATO. Of course, I share the point that NATO membership and EU membership are increasingly close. With Finland and Sweden entering into NATO, this division between EU non-NATO members and NATO EU members, that has shaped and troubled the cooperation for some time, I think is disappearing. I wouldn't even underevaluate the level, the pressure that the current situation puts member states. I mean, there is a clear understanding that something needs to be done. Also because more and more it's difficult to have a credible standing in the region if Europe does nothing to try to solve the issues. So there are conditions and new causes that can bring about different results than what we have seen, with a better division of labor between the two than in the past, perhaps.
Thank you. And for sake of time, I'll dive right into two more questions. Thank you to the Assistant Secretary and the Ambassador for the questions. I'll take the gentleman here and the gentleman there, and then we'll try and work in one more question after that.
My name is Carlo Trezza. I am a member of the Executive Board of the NATO Foundation. Well, I'm pleased that two speakers have mentioned the question of the Red Sea, which is usually being neglected, strangely enough in particular in the Mediterranean countries, because they are the ones which suffer more from the situation there. But I think that also on the other side of the Red Sea, towards the East, Asian countries are also suffering from the impact of the closure, the de facto closure of the Suez Canal. So what can be done in order to improve the situation? I mean, the mandates of the two naval expeditions there are very weak. The Security Council resolution is also very weak. I think that we have to attract more attention to this issue. What are your comments on that? Thank you.
Thank you. Gentleman here. Yeah.
Good afternoon, Brigadier General Aydin. I'm the director of the NATO Strategic Direction South Hub, and I'm happy to at this announce that NATO is looking 360 degrees to the south, because the hub is responsible for NATO to cover Middle East, North Africa, Sahel, and Sub-Saharan Africa. And then our role and mission is basically improve NATO's understanding in terms of challenges emanating, in terms of opportunities for more cooperation areas, and also including coordinating allied activity in the south. And when it comes to engagement and the recent effort, I will say that expectation management is a key issue. And I have a question for Mr. Koch, because you bring the issue of GCC, and you said GCC will not probably wait too long or forever, and then they will look for other options or alternatives. And I know that someone from GCC, a very high-level important person, is here. Maybe he can jump on the same question. And what exactly you think or that they want from NATO?
Thank you. Christian, do you want to dive right in just for that? And then
absolutely. I mean, what do you want from NATO directly? It's practical solutions to the current security threats that exist. It's real programs. It's no longer just saying we support peace and conflict resolution efforts in the region and have nice slogans. There are some real practical solutions we need. I mean, it just ties a little bit to the question of maritime security that was mentioned in the Red Sea. It's an extremely acute issue, and we've already seen the damage this is doing in terms of interrupted supply chains, and this affects Europe all the way to Asia. There's no question about it. Now, sometimes it's a delicate balance to maintain, because we don't want the situation to further, in a way, escalate. And this is why most Gulf states have been very supportive of European efforts, that it's being more the defensive mission.
that it protects the shipping that's going through the Red Sea, but there's not enough resources that are being spent on that. The European mission is extremely small. It has only a handful of ships, or not even that. Sometimes, it's 1 or 2 ships that are covering a big area. So you need a lot more resources that are put on that. But maritime security would be one specific area where I think NATO can also come in by joining many of the naval forces, expanding the exchange with there's great improvement we see at the moment in terms of Gulf naval capabilities. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the UAE is investing a lot in their naval capabilities. So there's an opening there to join more on coordination and cooperation. And that will be one specific area where we can see. So we need to see some results. It's just not enough if we keep on talking about what is necessary, but then on the ground you don't see much happening. And that's where, again, this idea of more structured dialogue really is important, because that allows for more frequent exchanges, which then allows you to really point more into what could be actionable steps to be taken. That's the first step to go down that route.
Thank you. I'll quickly bring in Luigi as to the first question, and then we're very short on time, and then we'll try and squeeze in one final question.
On the Red Sea, just adding that, of course, what has been deployed is clearly not sufficient to deter Houthi attacks, and there is a risk also for the future. I mean, this creates a precedent in a critical choke point area that risks to be replicated elsewhere. What if what happens in Yemen is replicated on the other side, on the African side, by even non-state actors or pirates or whatever? You joining forces that could be very detrimental for the traffic, more than it has been so far, which is already very big. So that is, again, it's an incentive and a clear mutual interest for GCC, for Europe, the NATO, to join forces and create something that is much more structured than ad hoc missions as they are now. And also, of course, looking at root causes is also important, looking at the political dimension, so resolving the conflict in Yemen, in the Horn of Africa. This is also would go a long way to try to diffuse the tensions.
Thank you. We've just seen how much Houthi violence in the region has disrupted shipping routes, trade, that affects us right here in Europe and really brings it home to everyday people here in Europe. I promised the gentleman right there, please.
Good afternoon. Thank you to the panel. I have a quick question. My name is Ken Kitatani. I represent the International Council on Environmental Economics and Development. We are a UN-accredited think tank, and we do major research concerning AI policy. We work with the NATO AI, also OECD, and also the UN Security Council on this research. So I have a question to the panel, and particularly to Ahmad. We are involved in many of these dialogues and discussions, closed meetings with these entities that I've just mentioned concerning the regulatory framework, etc. What type of statements, recommendations can we make? Can you suggest that we make that would help support, let's say, the Middle East and also Arab nations, so that we can help inform and even shape the course of these dialogues, which one purpose would be to help mitigate this negative impression that the West has this big tech dominance. And also in this way to be able to help support and leverage the work of the Middle East concerning AI, concerning the future.
Thank you. Please.
You want me to answer this in 1 minute?
Yeah, of course.
You see, this is, Ken, how you bring the 30,000 feet level question to the nitty-gritty matters, the large-scale policies and what we need to achieve. into the activities that your organization is doing. Look, I don't think that in your dialogue you are, I think that you are more technical focused on issues that have to do with AI and the regulatory framework and, you know, how to forge more cooperation between the members of the United Nations acting in this domain. However, if I want to bring this to the conflict and our region, in order for us to facilitate your work and have it fully implemented with all the parties buying in, its value credibility that has been tarnished in the eyes of the people on the southern flank of, or on the southern rim of the Mediterranean. We have an issue of credibility now because we've been always, you know, spoken to about values, about human rights, about democratic rights, about women's rights, you know. Everything, you know, that has been nurtured to us and promoted to us by the West has been tarnished over the past year or two. So basically now I'm telling you how people think in my region. So don't preach me again about all the values that you've been telling us over the past 50, 60 years. And if you want to regain this value system, then you need to address the issues. And addressing the issues, I go up again, 30,000 feet level, even going back to the issue of, you know, Red Sea and Maritime. Why do we have Houthis? Why do we have problems here and there and, you know, Iran and, you know, the Arab countries? And it goes back to one cause. And we're always shedding away, not looking at it. You know, it's like the elephant in the room and nobody is addressing it. It is the Arab-Israeli conflict. And is a problem with the Arabs? I tell you, not because I am an Arab. It is not with the Arabs. It is with the Israelis themselves. They do not want to have a solution. And this is what complicates all the initiatives that the UN, such as your very respectable organization, is doing.
Thank you. And I think value credibility is such a key point. And it's certainly, especially from we're here in Italy, so from a European standpoint, so many years in Brussels, values are always preached time and time again, and sometimes I think we forget the meaning behind that. So I think that's such an important takeaway. We're at our limit here, but I'd like to forward the panel 30 seconds to sum up briefly. So I'd like to frame it maybe somewhat creatively in this one. We just heard about a 360-degree lens to things. I think with that in mind, as it relates to politics and security and our economic challenges, as we stand at the cusp of all of the host of these challenges, are you an optimist or a pessimist about our future and the challenges we face?
I will be optimist. Okay, how about this? You know, with all what I said. Well, you listen. Of course, look, there's a difference between being realistic, because you need to address things as they are. I mean, you cannot just say, okay, I'm hopeful and optimistic, but then you look away from what is happening. You have to put things in perspective. These are the realities, and look forward. I, as a person, I am hopeful. Because why? Because I think my region deserves to have hope.
Thank you. Christian?
Well, I think for somebody who's been dealing with the Middle East, you know, for over 30 years, you better be optimistic. But I think overall, when just looking at the GCC states, I have to say, yes, I'm very optimistic because I see a lot of positive change happening in the right direction.
Thank you. Luigi?
Yeah, I have to be optimistic in spite of...
That's really pessimistic. You'd be the one dissenter.
I personally decide to look at the positive elements and the positive agenda. You need to build the positive, and that is a way to bring in a new dynamics and new ways amongst the various partners, and dialogue can go a long way also to facilitate this process.
Thank you, and I think that's an incredibly optimistic and positive note to finish this session on. Thank you to our distinguished panel, to Ahmed, to Christian, to Luigi, who handled host of issues in such a short time period and a field of different questions. Thank you to the excellent questions from our distinguished guests, Your Excellencies, and in the audience. And with that, we bring to an end our first session here. I think we can look forward to a refreshment a break. And thank you very much for your attention. It's been a pleasure to moderate today's session. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Matthew. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Silvia Colombo. I'm a researcher and faculty advisor at the NATO Defense College in Rome, here in Rome. And I want just to reiterate Dr. Gaub's thanks to the Foundation for inviting us to co-sponsor this event, this conference.